have a very short window to cover a lot of materials, so I'm going to get started here. My name is Randy Smith. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Regal Entertainment Group. And today, my esteemed panel, first is Mike Archer with Doremi, Clint Koch with Ultra Stereo Labs, and Chris Simpson with Sony Entertainment. Today we're going to talk about accessibility. It seems like we talk about this every year, and I think we'll talk about it for another 10 or 15 years because as several of the attorneys in the room will tell you, most of the civil rights laws include an attorney fee provision, so as a consequence of that, the litigation will continue. But we're not just talking about litigation here today. We actually have a change over the last 15 years. We have the opportunity to talk about actual accessibility technology that we all can have for reasonable prices to increase access in our facilities. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about, update you on some current legislation and litigation and some various issues associated with this topic. And once I get through that material, then each one of these fine gentlemen over here are going to give you a brief overview of their products. And if we have time after that, we're going to do a little panel discussion and some Q&A. But if we don't have time, each one of these individuals, companies, and their products are represented on the trade show, and they'll be more than happy to spend some time with you if you have further questions. So let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to start with is the litigation, and there are 3 cases that have raised some eyebrows of late. 2 of them were filed in January of this year in the Los Angeles area against ArcLight and Pacific Theaters. The first one is a litigation by an association called the Greater Los Angeles Agency for the Deaf. It kind of surprised me because they're not traditionally a very litigious group, but in this situation they did file suit against ArcLight, basically claiming they should have some form of access technology available, whether it be closed captioning. And actually this litigation here is reminiscent of some of the cases that were filed years ago, because it specifically references a particular product, which is the rear window captioning device. In their demand, it doesn't request it, but it's implicit throughout the complaint that that's what they're pointing to, so that's somewhat interesting. In that case, it's a class action on behalf of all the deaf and hard of hearing, and they are seeking damages and equitable relief. So that's kind of one of your traditional lawsuits. The other case that was filed is Crosby versus ArcLight, and this case is something that I think many lawyers have expected to see cases like this filed over the years, and they just haven't happened in my life. This is a situation where an individual contends that he visited the theater multiple times, and on multiple occasions the assisted listening devices didn't work. That's the headsets and the devices that were required to have in every one of our auditoriums. The individual, the attorney, was not trying not to be punny, because he says in the complaint that the plaintiff's complaints fell on deaf ears. Needless to say, in that case, the attorney, or the plaintiff, is seeking equitable relief as well as damages, and seeking that they develop maintenance and training protocols for their staff, which we'll talk a little bit in more detail later. Is a very good idea. And the last case actually was from last year, in the middle of July, the National Association of the Deaf versus Netflix. And if you're unfamiliar with this case, this is a very significant case. There's 2 aspects of it that are critical, because Netflix contended that they were not a public accommodation under Title III of the Americans with Disability Act, which traditionally you look at brick and mortar places like theaters. It's a public accommodation. We invite the public. We have to make it accessible for those that need some form of accommodation. In this instance, it's a website. The court ruled in favor of the National Association of Deaf, and specifically ruled that a website can be deemed a place of public accommodation. And this is different from saying whether your website is accessible for the blind and whatnot, that it can be read. This is literally that their product is delivered to consumers via their website. So the court did specifically find that it was a place of public accommodation. The next very critical aspect of this ruling, which is disconcerting, is that the court ruled that not only is Netflix a public accommodation, but they have a duty to provide captions for their product, even if the product doesn't originally have captions. If you're familiar with our position on this subject over the years, we've always said we just show the product, we don't make the product, we don't have the ability to manipulate the product and add captions. And for the most part, the courts have agreed with that position. So when you see in this situation where they've ruled that Netflix now has a duty to provide those captions, that becomes a little bit disconcerting, and it kind of feeds into my next topic, which is current legislation. There's been 2 bills proposed, one federal and state, within the past few months. The federal one is called the Captioning and Image Narration to Enhance Movie Accessibility Act. It's an amendment to Title III of the ADA. This one was submitted by Senator Tom Harkins of Iowa, and basically what he's seeking is that every facility with 2 or more auditoriums will be required to provide captions and descriptive narration on all films at all showtimes. The legislation is written provides for open or closed captioning, which is good, at least there's some clarity on that subject. But the provision that it provide all films in all showtimes can be somewhat disconcerting. While the big 6 studios are pretty much 100% providing captioning and a little less than 100% descriptive narration on their films, still a lot of the smaller studios are not providing those, the captions or the descriptive narration. As a consequence of that, when you see the Netflix ruling, where the court ruled that Netflix has to provide that, you get a little bit concerned as to what may come of that in the future. Fortunately, we have great people at NATO, and they went and had a meeting with the Senator and his staff, and took the time to educate them on the voluntary efforts of our industry, as well as the position of the Department of Justice in their proposed rules that, if you recall, or if you're familiar, the DOJ has proposed a rollout of 50% of the auditoriums over a 5-year period, and that's not regulation yet. That's what they announced as a proposed rule. And so they spent some time and they talked about what has been going on in the industry, particularly about the Big 3 and a few other circuits announcing that they're doing 100% of their auditoriums. And the Senator was very receptive. He and his staff did want the opportunity to see these technologies, so we provided him the locations in the DC area where he could actually utilize any of these technologies that are available that we're going to talk about today. And he's going to do this. Sadly, the reason this legislation exists is because Steven Spielberg was kind enough to set up a special viewing for lawmakers in DC of the film Lincoln last year. And when the senator approached Mr. Spielberg and expressed his concern that he couldn't hear it very well and wanted to know about captions, Mr. Spielberg's response was, I guess you just have to wait for the DVD. That's probably not what you say to a senator of the United States. They have a little authority to make our life difficult. In any event, hopefully, I don't think that bill is going to get too much traction. We don't think there's a lot of concern for that right now, but we're going to monitor it and see where it goes. The other bill is a state bill in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island has tried to get some bills passed over the years, so this is just another attempt. This is called the Equal Rights of Blind and Deaf Persons to Public Facilities. I'll be honest with you, we talked about this internally at NATO. We don't really believe we're going to oppose this bill. It's not very egregious. It basically provides that if you have 10 or more auditoriums in your facility, at least one must be accessible. And that goes into effect January 2014 if it's passed. The only thing that's a little disconcerting is they don't specify what kind of caption, whether it's open or closed. So there's going to be some effort. Belinda and her team will put some effort in clarifying that it should be closed caption, not open caption. And we'll see where that goes. I mean, that one was just filed a few weeks ago, as I recall. Now, in addition to the litigation and legislation, there's a few issues, both good and bad, I wanted to cover today. The first issue, which was kind of bad, any of you that have been around a while, you'll know that in the late 90s and early 2000s, the exhibition industry didn't have a very good rapport with the Department of Justice, unless you count them suing us constantly as a good relationship. In the mid-2000s, we made a concerted effort as an industry through NATO and various representatives of theater chains to build a relationship with the Department of Justice. And frankly, we did. We did a very good job. We had a great team at the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, that understood that we were people they could work with, not people you just go out and sue. And so we've had a good run with them. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, they've all gone by the wayside. We don't have any relationship with the current administration. which is disconcerting for a couple reasons. One is we don't want to be in that situation like we were back in the late 90s. And two is recently they announced some settlements against various healthcare facilities, and they were very aggressive and actually accomplished some things that are a little bit surprising to us. Big picture, what these healthcare facilities agreed to was that they would establish policies and training policies to create a means of effective communication with the deaf. Now, that doesn't sound too burdensome, but they're very explicit as to what kind of training and how it has to be done and what kind of policies need to be established. And then they took it a step further, and this is probably the most egregious part of the settlements, is that they're requiring each facility to employ a minimum of 2 individuals to be available 24 hours a day to create effective communication with the deaf or hard of hearing. Those are real dollars that they're going to expend on a daily basis, and it's 24 hours a day at no cost to the consumer. So whether that's a reasonable accommodation is questionable. I don't even know how. If I was their attorney, I would probably say if they're really pushing us for that, 1 would be enough. I don't know why they need 2, but they agreed to that. So that's what, if this administration is going to be aggressive, we need to get in the door, and we need to establish a relationship. So on April 30th, myself and various representatives of NATO are going to sit down with the Department of Justice and try to build that agreement. And hopefully we're successful. Now, we don't want them to go back and try and redo the proposed rule from 50% over 5 years. We did oppose that rule for various reasons, but we certainly don't want them to go back and make it more onerous than what they've currently got out there. One of the upsides, one of the good issues that are going on today is that Warner Brothers recently announced that they will be providing closed captioning on all their deluxe trailer drives going forward. And that's significant because in this area of the law, the advocates have been aggressive as it pertains to the feature presentation because that's the primary objective why you're going to the movie. But the reality, most attorneys would tell you that once that was accomplished, if it's accomplished, they're going to start focusing on the other aspect, which is the trailers. So we've kind of been pushing the studios to assist us and come up with captioning for trailers for some time. And Warner Brothers has stepped up and done it, and NATO's working with the other studios to try and get them on board. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, it also helps us in managing and these technologies as it pertains to how the guests experience the devices when they first get to use them. I'm going to cover just a little briefly. I'm not going to get into too much of their technologies, but I spend a lot of time with deaf advocates and communicating with them to understand what they like and what they don't like. So I figured I would talk a little bit about what's going on in the deaf and hard of hearing world as it pertains to this new influx of access that they historically have never had. And I'm going to tell you, it's overwhelmingly positive. We're never going to change the fact that most deaf are open captions. That's what they grew up with, that's what they're used to. They like to have the captions in their field of vision. So you're going to have a certain segment that are never going to be happy no matter what type of technology is developed. But overall, the overwhelming majority are so gracious and happy with the technologies that are out there today that you're going to hear about today. And the overwhelming reaction is they can't believe they now can see pretty much every feature, every day, every showtime, even open day, even 3D, even midnight shows. I mean, that type of access has been a dream for the advocates for 20 years, and it's something we've been working on as an industry for 15 years at least. And it feels good to be able to tell people, yes, we've told you for 10 years, and once digital comes, we're going to do this. It's good that we're able to do it. These people should be commended. They did a great job in their companies in developing these technologies, and all the hard work done by the various smart people that understand all the engineering and standards. It was a lot of work, and I'm very proud that we've been able to accomplish this objective. And I thought I picked a couple. I spoke with the ANC and Cinemark just to get some feedback, some of the consumer comments, and there's just so many. I'm not going to bore you with them, but I did want to read you a few of these quotes. This individual was discussing his first use of the USL device. He just said, I can start coming to the movies again because I can actually hear. This was an individual who says, my 94-year-old father refused to go to any theater, but because of this captive view experience, he wants to come all the time. And this was from a mother who was, I actually almost was going to read you the whole thing, but it was too lengthy, but I'm going to read you this little cutout. Having a deaf child, whenever the family would get together, we would have discussions about things to do, but we always had to nix movies because of the lack of captioning. I couldn't believe my eyes one day when I looked in and saw that you had 9 movies playing at your theater with caption. Now my daughter can go see movies when they come out, and for the first time, she could see a 3D movie. And also for the first time, when our family gets together, movies are actually an option for us to see. As a parent of a deaf child, I always have to fight for the accommodations she needs. It's great to be in a position to say thank you. We'll be coming to your theater as often as possible and telling all the friends in the deaf community. And that's the typical response you get. You know, it's like anything else in our world. We take it for granted because we have this access all the time. But I'll never forget when I first started working with Regal in Knoxville. They have a deaf school right there in Knoxville, and that was back in 1998. And we had, we would get from Tripod, if any of you don't remember Tripod, we'd get maybe 1 film every 3 or 4 months. So Regal, we'd just do a free showing for the Tennessee School for the Deaf. You see that first busload of kids coming out of the theater, and they're all doing this, giving you the sign language saying "I love you" for getting to see a movie. You know, kind of breaks your heart, but it makes you feel good that you get the opportunity to do that for them. So we've come a long way, and you walk a mile in somebody's shoes, you get to appreciate what you've done for them. And so that's the good thing. Now, unfortunately, then there's always some negative associated with any of these technologies, and we've had some. These are all first-generation technologies. There's a few bumps in the road. I'm not picking on anybody here, but there's the general big picture comments and complaints are for the glasses. The complaints are they're too heavy, they're cumbersome, they make them stand out like a sore thumb. And as far as it pertains to the seat mounts devices, it's pretty much the same type of complaints, that they're cumbersome. They don't like being sticking out in the crowd because they're carrying this thing or using it. It doesn't sit well in the seat mount. They have to continuously adjust it. They have to take their eyes off the screen to get the captions versus seeing it. But again, these complaints are the exception, not the rule. The overwhelming majority love these technologies and love the access that they haven't had. So I'm going to give you a few tips here, what you can do or what you should be doing. Because the first time somebody comes to your facility and utilizes one of these devices and it doesn't work right, you've pretty much lost them right at that point. And they're going to complain and tell everybody they know about the technology and it's not good. And unfortunately, there's been a few bumps. We've had some software problems. We've had some hardware problems. And again, they're first generation, but you know the bumps in the road are getting less and less. And I think we've crossed most of the hurdles. But as an exhibitions side of this equation, we need to do some things. And the first thing we need to do is you need to make certain that your staff are well trained. They need to understand how the technology works, and they need to be able to effectively communicate with the guest as to how to utilize the technology. When you're dealing with a blind individual, it's pretty simple. You simply just need to tell them how it works. But your staff needs to know what to tell them. When you're dealing with a deaf or hard of hearing individual, it's a little bit more difficult. And rather than fumble your way through trying to educate the individual on how the technology works, I suggest you have a handout that describes what the technology is and describes all the what you can do with it and how it works. We have the Sony system, and ours literally takes them step by step so they understand they can adjust the nose piece, they can adjust the size of the font for the captions, they can adjust the distance of the captions. All those little things help, because if you don't do that and they get in there and they don't understand, they can make some adjustments, like the complaint they're too heavy. Well, if you're watching a 2.5-hour movie, I've used these things, they do get heavy. They're only 3 ounces, but still, but you can adjust them. And it's these little things where we have operational failures that can create a bad experience for any guest. So develop the training, make sure people are well trained, and give them some tools to help them work with the guest that's going to be utilizing the technology. And the other thing, which is very frustrating for the deaf and blind users, the ultimate end users, you broke it, is that as it stands today, until Warner Brothers came out with their trailer with closed captions, they'd get into the auditorium and the feature would start and the device wouldn't work. So now they've got to go out and find somebody to assist them, and they miss the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie. And I don't know about you, but that's certainly going to upset me greatly if I'm the end user in that regard. So the trailers being captioned will help us. So that's another part of the education the staff would tell them. Regal actually captioned our policy trailer and add the audio narration. So just to give us that opportunity to correct the failure before the feature starts, because frankly, they're not going to be as upset that they had to come out and find somebody if they actually don't miss any of their movie. So, I would recommend that everybody consider doing that, because, the trailer lengths these days are anywhere, up to 15 minutes at least, and that gives you plenty of opportunity to correct the failures and avoid the bad experience. All right, that's my update, and at this point, I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to my left to give a brief overview of their technologies, and in alphabetical order, we're going to start with Mike Archer with Doremi. Mike?